So I'm writing this as a form of confession. Not because I've done anything wrong, but because I'm going to stand by and do nothing. I guess my story starts way back when I was about 6 or 7. I was out playing in the backyard with my ball, just hoofing it about when it went flying into my neighbor's yard. The fence between the two houses was very tall to a 7-year-old, and the only gap in it was next to a great big tree growing in the middle of the boundary fence. The fence had been erected on either side as whoever originally built the houses had obviously decided the tree was too nice to cut down. So, in my determined 7-year-old way, I slithered in between the tree and the fence, nearly getting stuck and catching my leg on a nail on the way. I popped through with one final effort, and was just about to inspect my wounds when a voice from under the tree said, "You're bleeding." On further inspection, there sat a little girl, roughly my age. This didn't come as any great surprise because I already knew about Ruby. I had heard my mother discussing our neighbors with her friends. Apparently her dad was a drinker, and her mother had run off when she was tiny. Sometimes we'd hear him yelling at Ruby when their windows were open. My mom would just tut and shake her head and say, "Poor little thing." No one ever thought to step in, though. That was just how it was. "Come in the house and wash that cut," she said, and I followed her meekly. While our houses must have been the same when they were built, hers was dilapidated and scruffy, where mine was bright and gleaming. She was just mopping up the blood from my leg when the front door banged. She turned a pale white and froze. And before either of us had time to think, her father came storming into the kitchen. Without a word, he slapped her across the face, sending her flying across the room. "Get out of my house!" He growled at me, and I fled, back through the yard and through the fence as fast as my legs could carry me. That night, the yelling from their house was worse. I lay in bed and covered my ears with my pillow. The next day, I felt I had to find out how she was. I slithered through the fence, more carefully this time, and sat under the big tree and waited for her, and in due time she came out of the house. She was looking pale but seemed happy to see me. I didn't want her to get into trouble, but she explained that morning she had a good long talk with her dad, and he agreed to stop drinking. Then she told me about the tree, said it was a magic tree, and if you sat under it and wished hard enough, the things you wish for come true. She had wished that her dad would stop hitting her, and now he wasn't going to anymore. What more did I need as evidence as a kid? Plus, she was a whole 6 months older than me, as it turned out, so I was slightly in awe of her wisdom. This became a pattern for us. After school, we'd sit under the wishing tree and play stupid games, or, as we got older, just talk. Sometimes she would put her head on my shoulder and I would tell her all about my day. And other times, we'd share the headphones on my MP3 player and listen to music. She always asked me to play Ruby by the Kaiser Chiefs. She playfully told me they had written the song for her. I can only ever remember having one argument with her, and that was over my 13th birthday party. When I invited her, she promised to come, but she never appeared. I even braved knocking on her door. My mom would have killed me if I slithered through the fence in my best party clothes. But her dad says she wasn't home. After the party, I got changed and slithered through the fence, and there she was, sitting under the tree. My feelings were hurt, and I told her as much. What kind of friend was she anyway to blow me off that way? "Look at me, Jack. I mean, really look at me," she said. "I don't belong with your friends." And I did look at her. The long, wild, dark hair tumbling down her back. The dark smudges that were her eyes. The clean, but washed-out dress that was obviously meant for a 10-year-old as it barely fit her. "I don't have any party clothes, and I couldn't bring you a present. I'm sorry," she said. In that moment, my heart thunked in my chest, and I fell in love as deeply as any 13-year-old can. "One day I'll take you away from this," I promised her. She sat under the wishing tree and said she wished I would. The last conversation I had with Ruby was again sitting under the wishing tree. I was heading off for college. I asked her why she wasn't leaving too, but she said she had to stick around. "I have to be here to remind my dad what a monster he is when he drinks," she said. "But one day I'm going to be free and leave this place." "I haven't forgotten what you promised," she said. Neither had I. But the heart can be fickle, especially when it's living in your pants. And during my time at college, I met a girl named Emma. Just before I graduated, we found out that Emma was pregnant. Not really part of my life plan, but I was happy enough. We moved back to my parents, and I got a job at my dad's factory, and we got married. The house next door was very run down, and apparently, Ruby's dad had died, and she had left. During the next 6 months, I bought the house off my folks, and they downsized into something smaller as neither of them were getting any younger, they said. Then things started to get a little weird. To begin with, Emma and I weren't getting along very well. Marry in haste, repent at leisure, as they say. Then one night, last summer, we were sitting in the garden. My parents had put a garden swing under the wishing tree. It was no longer a thing of beauty. The tree was gnarled and dead. We were sitting there having one of those conversations where it turned out that everything wrong with Emma's life was my fault. When during a break in the conversation, she suddenly put her head on my shoulder and started humming Ruby. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I just about leapt out of my seat. I thought about that a lot over the next few months. My Ruby, and how much I missed her. What had really happened to her? So yesterday, things came to a head. Over winter, the wishing tree had become unstable. It was dead, and during a high wind, a huge branch came smashing into the yard. I had hired someone to come take it down. It was still relatively early in the morning when I got a call at work from the police. They said remains had been found buried under the wishing tree. The remains of a 7-year-old girl. My Ruby. I flew home. It couldn't be her. I had known her until she was much older than that. When I got home, my parents were at my house. The police had called them too, as they were neighbors at the time of the incident. Even my parents remembered that night. The argument after her dad had found me in the house. The screaming of a small child. They also remembered they hadn't seen her since. They had informed the authorities at the time, something I knew nothing about. But her father had said her mother had taken her away and that no one could prove otherwise. I thought about her telling me he couldn't hit her anymore, and that long conversation they had the next morning. She stayed to keep him from drinking. I guess if anything would, it would be the nagging ghost of the child you murdered. Now that her remains had been found, I wondered if Ruby was finally free. So back to my confession I mentioned earlier. Emma has been away for a few days with our little boy, visiting her parents. She said she needed some space, and when she first arrived back this morning, her intention was to pack up their stuff and leave me. In the span of a couple of hours, I've seen a dramatic change in her. She's usually such a control freak, and not a hair out of place. But she's in the other room now, scouring the internet for holiday destinations. Within half an hour of being back, she snuggled up next to me, put her head on my shoulder, and asked if we could finally go away like I had promised her. Her hair is tumbling down her back, and she has the Kaiser Chiefs playing Ruby on the stereo. So what am I going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. I'm going to take my wife to see the world, like I promised her when she was 13 years old.